Colorado Territory, 1878. The mountains stood sentinel over Timber Valley like ancient gods watching mortal affairs with indifference. In this land where a man lived and died by his own strength, 25-year-old Kit Valmont believed one truth above all others. Love was a luxury that cowboys couldn't afford. The frontier demanded everything: blood, sweat, and an unwavering focus. Men who let their hearts rule their heads ended up with shallow graves and forgotten names. Kit adjusted his Stetson against the midday sun as he guided his chestnut gelding down the steep trail towards Silvercrest. After 4 months driving cattle through unforgiving territory, the small but growing mining town looked like paradise, despite its rough edges. His trail-worn clothes carried the dust of 3 territories, and his lean, muscular frame showed the hardened resilience of a man who'd chosen the saddle over civilization. Just supplies, and maybe one night of decent sleep. Thunder, he murmured to his horse, his voice carrying the soft accent of his Kentucky upbringing. Then back to the herd. At 25, Kit's handsome face hadn't yet been weathered by time, though a thin white scar traced his jawline, a reminder from a Cheyenne brave 3 summers prior. His green eyes remained clear and sharp, missing nothing, and the light stubble covering his square jaw was the most he'd ever allowed himself. Silvercrest had grown since Kit's last visit. New storefronts lined the main street, and the clang of metal from the blacksmith's forge mixed with piano notes from the saloon. Progress marched relentlessly westward, bringing both opportunity and complication. Kit dismounted outside Thurston's general store, his boots hitting the packed dirt with practiced ease. The weight of his Colt revolver settled familiarly against his hip as he looped Thunder's reins around the hitching post. He needed supplies, information about trail conditions, and perhaps a hot meal that wasn't beans. Anything more invited trouble. Loneliness is just the price of freedom, he reminded himself, a mantra formed in the years since leaving home. The ghosts of his past had taught him harsh lessons about attachment. His parents' homestead burned to ashes in the border wars. The girl in Nebraska who chose security over his wandering ways. The partner who died taking a bullet meant for Kit during a cattle rustling. The bell above Thurston's door announced his arrival. The store smelled of coffee, leather, and the sweetness of hard candy. Sense of civilization that always felt foreign after months on the trail. And that's when he saw her. Leah Taylor stood behind the counter, auburn hair cascading in waves past her shoulders, her blue-green eyes lifting to meet his. At 21, she possessed a natural beauty that required no enhancement, though her simple blue calico dress complemented her fair complexion. Her delicate features brightened with a welcoming smile that transformed her from merely pretty to breathtaking. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice musical and warm. "Welcome to Thurston's. What can I help you with today?" Kit found himself momentarily speechless, an unusual condition for a man who'd talked his way out of confrontations with Indians and outlaws alike. He removed his hat, suddenly aware of his trail-worn appearance. "Afternoon, miss. I need supplies." He managed to find his voice, reciting his list while she gathered the items with efficient grace. "You're not from Silvercrest," she observed, not a question but a statement. "No, ma'am. Just passing through with a cattle drive. Headed to Fort Collins with 2,000 head." Her eyes brightened with interest. "That sounds like quite an adventure. I've never been farther east than Denver myself." "It's work, miss. Hard work." His tone was perhaps more curt than he intended, an instinctive defense against her curious eyes. "I imagined so." She didn't seem deterred by his brusqueness. "But surely there must be moments worth the hardship? The sunrises, perhaps? Or the stars at night?" Something in her question caught him off guard. Most townsfolk either romanticized the cowboy life or dismissed it entirely. Few asked about the moments between the struggle. "There are compensations," he admitted reluctantly. "When the herd's settled and the night's clear, it's like having the whole sky to yourself." Her smile deepened, revealing a dimple in her right cheek. "That sounds lovely." The door behind her opened, and an older man with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard stepped through. His eyes narrowed immediately upon seeing Kit. "Leah, your mother needs help with dinner preparations," he said, his gaze never leaving Kit. "Yes, father." She turned back to Kit. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "No, miss. That'll do." Kit paid for his supplies, aware of the older man's scrutiny. As he gathered his purchases, the man stepped forward. Ezekiel Taylor. He introduced himself with a firm handshake. I own this establishment. Kit Valmont, he replied, matching the man's grip. Just passing through, I hope? There was no mistaking the implication. Yes, sir. Back on the trail by morning. Ezekiel nodded, seemingly satisfied. Silvercrest is growing into a proper town, Mr. Valmont. We've left behind the lawless days. We value order here. I'm not looking for trouble, Mr. Taylor. Good men seldom are. But trouble has a way of following certain professions. With that cryptic statement, Ezekiel turned his attention to another customer. Kit left the store feeling unsettled. He'd faced overt hostility before, but Taylor's polite warning carried something more calculated. Shaking off the encounter, he focused on securing lodging for the night. However, fate had other plans. As he crossed the street, a commotion erupted from the livery stable. A large bay horse bolted through the open doors, dragging a young stable boy who'd become entangled in the reins. Without hesitation, Kit dropped his supplies and moved into the animal's path. Years of handling spooked cattle served him well. He spoke in low, calm tones while maneuvering to grab the dangling reins. The horse reared once, hooves slashing dangerously near his head, but Kit stood his ground. Moments later, the bay settled, blowing nervously but no longer panicking. You all right, boy? Kit asked, helping the stable hand to his feet. Yes, sir. Thank you. The lad couldn't have been more than 15. That's Judge Preston's horse. He'd have had my hide if anything happened to it. A crowd had gathered, and Kit became aware of Leah Taylor standing nearby, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. Beside her stood an elegant woman who must have been her mother, and behind them both, Ezekiel Taylor watched with an unreadable expression. That was incredibly brave, Leah said, stepping forward. Kit handed the reins back to the stable boy. Just did what needed doing. Perhaps you could join us for dinner tonight, Mrs. Taylor suggested, earning a sharp look from her husband. To thank you properly. Before Kit could formulate a polite refusal, Ezekiel intervened. I'm sure Mr. Valmont has pressing business, my dear. He mentioned he'd be leaving by morning. All the more reason to offer him one good meal before his journey, she countered smoothly. Caught between them, Kit felt the weight of Ezekiel's disapproval and the unexpected pull of Leah's hopeful gaze. I wouldn't want to impose, he began. Nonsense, Mrs. Taylor insisted. 7 o'clock. The White House at the end of Pine Street. And with that invitation, the course of Kit Valmont's life changed irrevocably, though he couldn't have known it then. Dinner at the Taylors proved to be an unexpected window into a life Kit had convinced himself he could never have. The home was modest but comfortable, filled with the small touches that transformed a house into something more. Pressed linens, family photographs, shelves of well-loved books. Mrs. Taylor, Margaret, she insisted he call her, served a meal that made the last 4 months of trail cooking seem like barbarism. Throughout the evening, Kit found himself engaged in conversation more substantive than he'd experienced in years. Young Daniel, Leah's 16-year-old brother, peppered him with questions about cattle drives and frontier justice. Margaret inquired thoughtfully about his family back east, accepting his vague answers without pressing. Only Ezekiel maintained a polite but unmistakable reserve, his eyes tracking every interaction between Kit and Leah with the precision of a hunting hawk. What brings you to the cattle business, Mr. Valmont? Ezekiel asked during a momentary lull. You speak like an educated man. Father, Leah admonished softly. Kit wiped his mouth with his napkin before answering. No offense taken. My father insisted on education. I had 2 years at a college in Kentucky before the war disrupted everything. Yet you chose this life? Kit met the older man's gaze directly. I chose freedom, sir. The open country suits me. Freedom, Ezekiel repeated, as if testing the word's validity. An admirable concept, though perhaps overvalued by the young. Security and community have their merits as well. Indeed they do. Kit agreed diplomatically, though the walls he'd built around himself seemed to whisper otherwise. After dinner, when Daniel had been sent to complete his studies and Margaret busied herself in the kitchen, Leah offered to show Kit their modest garden. Ezekiel began to object, but his wife placed a gentle hand on his arm. It's just the garden, dear. We can watch from the window. The evening air carried the scent of pine and late summer blooms. Stars pricked the darkening sky, Familiar companions to Kit, but somehow different when viewed from this peaceful garden beside a woman whose presence unsettled his carefully constructed solitude. "I apologize for my father," Leah said softly as they walked between rows of vegetables. "He's protective." "With good reason," Kit replied. "The frontier isn't always kind, especially to families." She stopped beside a rose bush that seemed out of place among the practical plantings. "This was my grandmother's. Mother insists on keeping roses, even though they serve no purpose beyond beauty." Her fingers gently touched a bloom. "Father says beauty without purpose is frivolous." "And what do you say?" Kit found himself genuinely curious about her answer. She looked up at him, moonlight catching in her eyes. "I think beauty is its own purpose. Like those stars you watch at night. They don't help the cattle move any faster, yet you still look up." Something shifted in Kit's chest, a crack in the foundation of his certainty. "You're a surprising woman, Miss Taylor." "Leah," she corrected. "And you're an unexpected cowboy, Mr. Valmont." "Kit," he responded automatically. A moment of silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with possibilities neither dared name. "Will you really leave tomorrow?" she finally asked. "I have responsibilities. 2,000 cattle and 6 men counting on me." She nodded, understanding evident in her expression. "Of course, responsibility matters." "It's all that matters," he said, echoing his long-held belief, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. From the porch, Ezekiel's voice called, "Leah, it's getting late." The spell broken, they returned to the house. Kit thanked the family for their hospitality and took his leave, walking back to the modest room he'd rented above the saloon. Sleep eluded him that night, his mind filled with auburn hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see past his carefully constructed walls. Morning arrived with unwelcome clarity. Kit had a job to finish, men depending on him, and no place in his nomadic existence for daydreams about pretty shopkeepers. He settled his bill and retrieved Thunder from the livery, intending to gather his supplies from where he'd stored them and ride out without further complications. Fate intervened again in the form of a runaway wagon. Kit had just emerged from the stable when shouts drew his attention to a heavily loaded freight wagon careening down the main street. The driver slumped over unconsciously. Directly in its path stood Leah, frozen in momentary shock. Kit didn't remember moving. One moment he was holding Thunder's reins. The next he was sprinting toward Leah, his body acting on instinct honed through years of split-second decisions. He collided with her, arms wrapping protectively around her waist, as he spun them both clear of the wagon's path. They tumbled to the boardwalk, Kit taking the brunt of the impact. For a heartbeat they remained tangled together, her wide eyes inches from his, her breath warm against his face. Then reality reasserted itself, and Kit helped her to her feet as townsfolk rushed to stop the wagon and aid the driver. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands unconsciously checking her arms for injury. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. "You saved my life." Before he could respond, Ezekiel pushed through the gathering crowd, his face pale with fear quickly transforming to relief, then suspicion as he noted their proximity. "Leah? Thank God." He pulled his daughter into a protective embrace before turning to Kit. "Mr. Valmont, I thought you'd be gone by now." "I was just leaving, sir." Kit stepped back, aware of the boundaries being redrawn. "Then I won't delay you further. Though we appreciate your timely intervention." The dismissal couldn't have been clearer, yet when Kit glanced at Leah, something in her expression made him hesitate. Without thinking through the consequences, he heard himself say, "Actually, Mr. Taylor, I need to check on my men at the camp first. I'll be heading out tomorrow instead." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "I see. Well, good day to you." As the Taylors walked away, Leah glanced back once, a small smile playing at her lips. Kit knew he'd just made a potentially disastrous decision, yet couldn't bring himself to regret it. The following days became an exercise in self-deception. Kit told himself he remained in Silvercrest to rest the cattle, to allow his men some well-deserved recreation, to gather more comprehensive supplies. He pointedly ignored the fact that his steps inevitably led to Thurston's general store every afternoon, where Leah's bright smile undermined years of carefully cultivated detachment. They spoke of books she'd read and lands he'd seen. She told him of her dreams to someday see the ocean. He described the endless expanse of the Nebraska plains. Small conversations, seemingly inconsequential, yet each word formed a bridge across the chasm of their different worlds. Why does your father dislike cowboys so much? Kit finally asked one afternoon when Ezekiel was meeting with the town council. Leah's expression clouded. It's not all cowboys. She hesitated. Just men like me, he supplied. Men who don't stay, she clarified. My Aunt Eleanor fell in love with a cattle driver when she was young. He promised to return after one last drive. She waited 3 years before learning he'd married a rancher's daughter in Texas. She arranged a display of hair ribbons with careful precision. Father had to support her until she finally married the pharmacist. He believes men who wander can't be trusted with a woman's heart. He might be right, Kit admitted, the words tasting bitter. The trail's a hard life. Many men make promises they mean in the moment but can't keep. Leah looked at him directly. And what about you, Kit Valmont? Do you make promises you don't intend to keep? I make very few promises for that exact reason. Something shifted in her eyes, disappointment perhaps, or resignation. That's honest at least. Before he could respond, the bell above the door announced a customer. The moment passed, leaving Kit unsettled by the conversation and his own conflicted feelings. That evening, Kit sat with his trail boss, Mason, outside their camp at the edge of town. The cattle grazed peacefully in the rented pasture while the other men enjoyed Silvercrest's limited entertainments. We're losing time, Kit, Mason observed, his weathered face expressionless in the firelight. Buyer and Fort Collins won't wait forever. I know. Kit stared into the flames. We'll head out day after tomorrow. Mason studied him knowingly. Wouldn't have anything to do with that pretty girl at the general store, would it? Kit's sharp look only confirmed the older man's suspicion. Been riding with you 3 years now, Mason continued. Never seen you linger anywhere, especially not for a woman. I'm not lingering for her, Kit denied automatically. Just making sure the men and cattle are rested. Sure. Mason knocked ash from his pipe. Just remember what you always told me. Cowboys and settling down mix about as well as water and gunpowder. I remember, Kit said quietly, though for the first time, the philosophy he'd lived by seemed less like wisdom and more like fear disguised as practicality. The next morning, Kit rode into town determined to purchase the remaining supplies and say a proper goodbye to Leah. He found her alone in the store, arranging a new shipment of fabric. Good morning, she greeted him, her smile warming something inside him that had been cold for years. Morning. He removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. I came to say we're moving on tomorrow. Early. Her smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. I thought as much. Your cattle are rested, and the weather's holding. Yes. He cleared his throat. I wanted to thank you and your family for the hospitality. Will you come back through Silvercrest? The question was casual, but her eyes betrayed its importance. Kit hesitated. The honest answer was probably no. Once the cattle were delivered, he'd likely take another job heading south or west. The trail led ever onward, never circling back. That was the life he'd chosen, the freedom he'd convinced himself he needed. I don't know, he finally said. The work takes me where it takes me. Disappointment shadowed her face, though she tried to hide it. Of course. Well, I wish you safe travels, Kit Valmont. The finality in her voice struck him harder than expected. He started to respond when the back door opened and Ezekiel entered, his expression darkening upon seeing Kit. Mr. Valmont. Back again. Just saying goodbye, sir. We're leaving tomorrow. Something like relief crossed the older man's features. I see. Well, I wish you good fortune on your journey. An uncomfortable silence followed until Kit nodded awkwardly and turned to leave. At the door, he looked back once. Leah stood watching him, her father's hand resting possessively on her shoulder. The image stayed with him as he walked to the saloon, intending to have one last drink before returning to camp. The saloon was crowded for midday, local miners mixing with travelers and the occasional cowboy from Kit's outfit. He found a quiet corner table, nursing a whiskey while wrestling with emotions he'd long denied. The rational part of him knew leaving was the only sensible choice. The life he led offered no stability, no permanence. Yet something about Leah Taylor had awakened possibilities he'd forced himself to forget. Mind if I join you? The voice startled Kit from his thoughts. A well-dressed man in his 30s stood beside the table, holding a glass of amber liquid. His clothes marked him as someone of means, though the slight bulge beneath his jacket suggested he carried a concealed weapon. Free country, Kit replied with a noncommittal shrug. The man sat, studying Kit with calculating eyes. Victor Harrington, he introduced himself. I understand you've been spending time with Leah Taylor. Kit's posture stiffened imperceptibly. Miss Taylor and I are acquaintances. Harrington smiled thinly. Of course, but perhaps you're unaware of certain expectations in the community. Miss Taylor and I have an understanding. Is that so? Kit kept his voice neutral despite the sudden flare of something dangerously close to jealousy. Not formally announced, but Ezekiel and I have discussed the matter extensively. I own the mining operation north of town. The merger of our businesses makes perfect sense. Seems you should be discussing this with Miss Taylor, not me. Kit drained his whiskey, preparing to leave. Harrington's hand shot out, gripping Kit's wrist with surprising strength. Let me be plain, cowboy. Leah Taylor is destined for a respectable life with a man of standing. Not some drifter who'll abandon her once the novelty wears off. Kit carefully removed the man's hand. I'm leaving tomorrow, Harrington. Your understanding with the Taylors isn't my concern. See that it stays that way. Harrington stood, adjusting his jacket. Some free advice. Men like you don't belong in the futures of women like Leah. The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone. After Harrington departed, Kit ordered another whiskey, his mind churning. The man's presumption angered him, but the underlying message echoed his own doubts. What could he possibly offer Leah except brief attention before the trail called him away? He was still brooding when Mason found him an hour later, expression grim. We've got trouble, his trail boss announced without preamble. Cattle are showing signs of illness. Could be blackleg. Kit cursed under his breath. Blackleg could decimate a herd in days. How many? Only 3 showing symptoms so far. I've isolated them, but if it spreads, we need a veterinarian, Kit said, standing immediately. Or at least someone with experience treating cattle. Mason shook his head. Already asked. Nearest vet is in Denver. There's a rancher about 20 miles north who might know something, but it would take a day to reach him and return. The situation couldn't have come at a worse time. Delaying their departure now meant potential catastrophic losses if the disease spread. Yet moving infected cattle risked not only the rest of their herd, but any livestock they passed along the way. I'll ride for the rancher at first light, Kit decided. You keep the sick cattle isolated and watch the others for symptoms. And if more fall ill, Kit's jaw tightened. Then we have bigger problems than a delayed delivery. The following morning, Kit rode hard for the northern ranch, returning late that night with medicine and advice that offered cautious hope. The rancher had indeed seen blackleg before and provided a treatment that might save the infected cattle, though full recovery would take at least a week. For 7 days, Kit and his men worked relentlessly, administering medicine, monitoring the herd, and isolating any animal showing symptoms. Gradually, the crisis abated. The infected cattle began recovering, and no new cases appeared. During this time, Kit avoided town completely, throwing himself into the work partly out of necessity and partly to escape his conflicted feelings about Leah. By the 8th day, when it became clear the herd would recover, he found himself mentally preparing to leave without seeing her again. It seemed cleaner, simpler, the kind of clean break he'd always made before. Mason had other ideas. You should go into town, he suggested as they checked the recovering cattle. Get cleaned up, maybe say proper goodbyes. We won't be ready to move out until tomorrow anyway. Nothing to say that hasn't been said, Kit replied, more harshly than intended. Mason regarded him steadily. 3 years riding together, and I've never seen you like this over a woman. Maybe that means something. It means nothing, Kit insisted. Just a brief connection. Happens sometimes. Sure it does, Mason agreed too easily. So no harm in one last conversation before we go. Unless you're afraid. The challenge hit its mark. Kit glared at his friend, then sighed in resignation. Fine, I'll go into town, but just to check for any messages from the buyer. An hour later, freshly bathed and in his cleanest clothes, Kit entered Silvercrest with conflicting emotions. Part of him hoped to see Leah one last time. Another part feared exactly that encounter. As he approached the general store, he noticed a crowd gathered outside. Drawing closer, he saw a banner strung across the entrance announcing an engagement celebration. His steps faltered as Ezekiel's voice carried above the murmur of conversation. Margaret and I are delighted to announce the engagement of our daughter, Leah, to Mr. Victor Harrington. Please join us in celebrating their future together." The crowd applauded as Harrington stepped forward, placing his arm possessively around Leah's waist. Even from a distance, Kit could see the stiffness in her posture, the forced quality of her smile. Her eyes scanned the crowd briefly, landing on him at the periphery. Something flashed across her face: surprise, relief, regret, before Harrington drew her attention back to the well-wishers surrounding them. Kit should have left then. Everything rational told him to turn around, return to camp, and put Silvercrest and Leah Taylor firmly in his past. Instead, he found himself lingering as the crowd dispersed, watching as Leah and her family went back into the store with Harrington following closely. Almost against his will, Kit crossed the street and entered the store. The bell announced his arrival, causing 4 heads to turn in his direction. Recognition, displeasure, surprise, and something indefinable crossed their faces in turn. "Mr. Valmont," Ezekiel greeted him coolly. "What brings you to town? I understood your herd had fallen ill." "Recovering now," Kit replied, his eyes fixed on Leah. "We'll be moving on tomorrow." "Excellent news," Harrington interjected, stepping closer to Leah. "As you can see, we're celebrating our engagement. Perfect timing for you to offer congratulations before you depart." The challenge in the man's tone was unmistakable. Kit should have offered polite congratulations and left. Instead, he found himself asking, "May I speak with Miss Taylor privately for a moment?" Ezekiel's face darkened. That would hardly be appropriate under the circumstances. "It's fine, Father," Leah said, speaking for the first time. "Mr. Valmont saved my life, after all. The least I can offer is a proper goodbye." She extricated herself from Harrington's grip. "We'll just step onto the porch. In full view," she added when her father began to object. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the street in golden light. Leah stood with her back straight, hands clasped before her, the perfect picture of propriety except for the turmoil evident in her eyes. "Congratulations," Kit said, the word tasting like ash. "Thank you." She didn't meet his gaze. "Are you happy?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Now she looked at him, a flash of defiance in her expression. "Mr. Harrington is a respectable man with prospects. Father approves." "That's not what I asked." Leah glanced through the window where her father and fiancé watched vigilantly. "What I feel doesn't matter," she said softly. "This is my duty to my family. The sensible path. And if there were another path?" Kit stepped closer, driven by an impulse he couldn't name. "Don't." Her voice caught. "You're leaving tomorrow. You said so yourself." "I could come back," he heard himself say, surprising them both. Hope flickered across her face before she suppressed it. "To what end, Kit? You've made your position clear. You chose freedom over attachment. The trail over home. Maybe I was wrong." The admission cost him, but once spoken, felt strangely liberating. Leah shook her head, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It doesn't matter now. I'm engaged. Father has given his blessing. The arrangements are made." The door opened behind them, and Ezekiel stepped onto the porch. "Leah, your mother needs your assistance inside." She nodded, composing herself. "Goodbye, Kit Valmont. I wish you safe journeys." With dignity that twisted something in Kit's chest, she returned inside. Ezekiel remained, his expression stern. "I'll be plain, Mr. Valmont. Your presence is disruptive. Leah has accepted a proposal from a man of substance and character. A man who will provide for her here, not drag her into the uncertainties of your lifestyle." "Did she accept?" Kit asked quietly. "Or did you?" Anger flashed across Ezekiel's features. "How dare you question my concern for my daughter's welfare? Victor Harrington represents everything stable and prosperous, everything you are not. My daughter deserves security, not romantic notions that dissolve at the first hardship." "Have you asked what she wants?" "I know what she needs," Ezekiel countered. "Fathers must sometimes make difficult decisions for their children's future happiness, even if it makes them miserable now." Ezekiel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully, Cowboy. You ride in, turn her head with excitement and danger, then you'll ride out again, leaving her with nothing but regrets. I've seen it before. I won't allow it to happen to Leah." His tone hardened. "The engagement celebration continues tomorrow evening. By then, I expect you to be far from Silvercrest." With that ultimatum, he returned inside, leaving Kit alone with the realization that for the first time in years, the prospect of the open trail ahead brought no joy, only emptiness. That night, Kit sat alone by the campfire, his decision made. At dawn, they would drive the cattle toward Fort Collins as planned. His brief connection with Leah Taylor would remain just that, a moment of possibility never realized. It was better this way, he told himself. Safer. Harrington could give her the stable life he never could. Ezekiel was right about that much. You look like a man attending his own funeral, Mason observed, dropping onto the log beside him. Kit shrugged noncommittally. Heard in town, there's a big engagement celebration tomorrow. Taylor girl's marrying that mining fellow. Mason studied Kit's face in the firelight. Strange timing, announcing it right when we were delayed. Not strange at all, Kit replied. They've had an understanding for some time, according to Harrington. Funny way to show it. That girl looked at you like you hung the moon. Kit stirred the fire unnecessarily. Doesn't matter. We're leaving at first light. Are we? Mason packed his pipe thoughtfully. You know, my sister married a man our father chose. Respectable banker, good prospects. Found her 2 years later crying over her mending every night. He struck a match. Left him eventually. Said the only thing worse than being alone was being with someone who made you feel alone anyway. What's your point? No point, Mason said innocently. Just making conversation. They sat in silence until Mason spoke again. You know what I've noticed about you, Kit? You talk about freedom like it's everything, but you've built yourself a mighty small cage. He stood, knocking ash from his pipe. Something to consider before tomorrow. After Mason left, Kit remained by the fire, turning his friend's words over in his mind. The truth in them cut deeper than he wanted to admit. For years, he'd convinced himself that attachment was weakness, that love was a luxury cowboys couldn't afford. But what if his real fear wasn't the risk of loving, but of being transformed by it? Dawn broke with Kit still awake, a decision crystallizing that frightened and exhilarated him in equal measure. When Mason approached to begin preparations for departure, Kit met him with calm resolve. There's been a change of plans, he said. I need you to take the herd to Fort Collins without me. Mason's weathered face split into a knowing grin. About time you figured it out. This doesn't mean anything will come of it, Kit cautioned. Her father's dead set against me, and she's engaged to another man. Details, Mason dismissed with a wave. The important part is you're finally fighting for something besides just survival. As his men prepared to move the cattle northward, Kit rode towards Silvercrest with no clear plan beyond the certainty that he couldn't leave without telling Leah the truth, that she had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. Whether it would make any difference, he didn't know, but for once, the uncertainty didn't terrify him. Silvercrest was already bustling with preparations for the evening's celebration when Kit arrived. Bunting decorated the front of the general store, and tables were being arranged in the street for the community feast. He tethered Thunder outside the saloon and scanned the activity for any sign of Leah. Well, look who's still in town. Victor Harrington's voice came from behind him. I thought you cowboys would be gone by now. Kit turned slowly. The herd's moving out today. I stayed behind to finish some business. Harrington's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What business could you possibly have on the day of my engagement celebration? That depends entirely on Leah, Kit replied evenly. Miss Taylor to you, Harrington corrected, his composure slipping. And she's made her choice. So have her parents. Then you won't object to me hearing that from her directly. Harrington stepped closer, his voice lowering. Listen carefully, Valmont. I've invested considerable resources in Silvercrest. The merger with Taylor's business represents significant advantages for everyone involved. I won't allow some saddle tramp to interfere with my arrangements. Arrangements? Kit's disgust showed plainly. Is that how you see marriage? A business arrangement? That's precisely what it is, Harrington replied coldly. Sentiment is for dime novels and schoolgirls. Real men build futures on practical foundations. And what Leah wants doesn't factor into these practical considerations. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Women often don't know what's best for them until they're guided to the correct conclusion. Ezekiel understands this. The casual arrogance of the statement ignited something dangerous in Kit. I think I'll let Leah make that determination for herself. As Kit turned to leave, Harrington grabbed his arm. Stay away from her, cowboy. This is your final warning. Kit looked pointedly at the hand restraining him until Harrington released his grip. I don't take well to threats, Harrington. Never have. Their confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Leah Taylor, who assessed the situation with evident displeasure. Mr. Valmont, I believed we had an understanding about your departure. We did, Kit acknowledged. I've reconsidered. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. This is most unfortunate. Mr. Harrington, would you excuse us? I need to speak with Mr. Valmont privately. Once Harrington reluctantly withdrew, Ezekiel's demeanor hardened. Whatever you're planning, I urge you to reconsider. My daughter's future is settled. With all respect, Mr. Taylor, I believe that should be Leah's decision. She has decided, Ezekiel insisted. The engagement is announced, the celebration planned. Then let me speak with her. If she tells me directly that marrying Harrington is what she wants, I'll ride out today and never return. Conflict played across Ezekiel's features, anger, calculation, and something that might have been doubt. Finally, he said, very well. Come with me. They walked in tense silence to the Taylor home, where Ezekiel led Kit to his study and closed the door. Wait here. I'll send Leah in momentarily. Left alone, Kit noticed the photographs arrayed on Ezekiel's desk, family portraits spanning years. One caught his attention, a much younger Ezekiel standing proudly beside a beautiful dark-haired woman who resembled Leah, both of them looking exhausted but triumphant. Behind them stood a half-built storefront that Kit recognized as the earlier incarnation of Thurston's General Store. That was the day we finished the roof. Leah's voice came from the doorway. Mother says it was the proudest day of Father's life. Kit turned to find her watching him, dressed in a simple blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, which had been arranged in an elegant style befitting a celebration. She looked beautiful and deeply unhappy. Your father built all this from nothing? Kit asked, still holding the photograph. Yes. They came west with barely enough money for land. Everything else they created through work and determination. Pride mingled with something like resignation in her voice. Father believes security must be earned through sacrifice and practical choices. And what do you believe? Kit set the photograph down carefully. Leah closed the door behind her. It doesn't matter what I believe. The arrangements are made. It matters to me. Kit crossed to her. Tell me you want this marriage. That Harrington is your choice, and I'll go. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. What alternative are you offering, Kit? A few beautiful moments before you continue on your way? The memory of what might have been while I remain here alone. The question cut to the heart of his dilemma. What was he offering? Until this moment, he hadn't fully confronted the implications of his decision to stay. I don't know exactly, he admitted. I only know that walking away from you feels like the worst mistake I could make. That's not enough. Her voice broke slightly. Father forbade any connection between us. He insists Victor is the sensible choice. And your mother? A faint smile touched Leah's lips. Mother believes in love, but she won't openly contradict Father. Kit took her hands in his, relieved when she didn't pull away. Leah, I've spent years convincing myself that the only way to survive is to keep moving, to avoid attachment. I thought freedom meant never belonging anywhere or to anyone. He squeezed her hands gently. But these past days have shown me how empty that freedom really is. Hope flickered in her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying some things are worth fighting for. Worth changing for. He released one of her hands to brush a tear from her cheek. If you tell me there's a chance, any chance at all, that you could feel for me what I'm beginning to feel for you, I'll find a way to stay. To build something real here. The door opened abruptly, revealing Ezekiel and Victor Harrington. The latter's face darkened with anger at the sight of Kit and Leah standing so close. This is outrageous, Harrington sputtered. Ezekiel, I demand you put an end to this immediately. Father, please, Leah began. Enough. Ezekiel's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Valmont, I gave you an opportunity to speak with my daughter out of respect for your previous assistance to our family. That courtesy is now withdrawn. He gestured to the doorway. Please leave my home. Kit remained where he stood. Not until Leah tells me what she wants. How dare you? Harrington interjected. Leah is my fiancée. Her father has given his blessing. Your presence here is an insult to us all. Victor, please, Leah said, stepping away from Kit. This isn't helping. Harrington's face reddened further. I will not be made a fool of, Leah. Not by some drifter with nothing to his name, but trail dust and empty promises. That's enough, Ezekiel intervened. Victor, Give us a moment. When Harrington hesitated, Ezekiel added firmly, please. After Harrington stalked out, Ezekiel closed the door and turned to his daughter. Leah, I've tried to be patient. Mr. Valmont has certain romantic notions about life that bear no resemblance to reality. Victor offers security, position, a future here in Silvercrest. I know, Father. Leah's voice was steady despite her evident distress. You've made that abundantly clear. Then why are you entertaining this fantasy? He gestured dismissively toward Kit. Leah straightened, something resolute entering her expression. Because it's my life. Not a business arrangement, not a merger of assets. My life. Ezekiel's expression softened slightly. I only want what's best for you. What will make you happy in the long run, not just in the moment. How can you know what will make me happy if you never ask me? The question hung in the air between them. Kit remained silent, understanding that this was a moment between father and daughter that he had no right to interrupt. Ezekiel sighed heavily, suddenly looking older. Your Aunt Eleanor. I'm not Aunt Eleanor, Leah interrupted gently. And Kit isn't the man who abandoned her. How can you be sure? Ezekiel challenged, looking at Kit with lingering skepticism. Kit met his gaze directly. I can't prove what I'll do tomorrow, Mr. Taylor. No man can. I can only tell you that meeting your daughter has changed something fundamental in me. For the first time in years, I'm considering a future beyond the next cattle drive. Words, Ezekiel dismissed. Men like you are full of pretty words when it suits them. Then judge me by my actions, Kit countered. Give me a chance to prove myself. I'll stay in Silvercrest, find work, demonstrate that I can be more than just a drifter. Ezekiel's eyebrows rose in surprise. You'd give up the life you've chosen? For my daughter? For the chance to see if what I feel for her might grow into something lasting? Yes. The room fell silent as Ezekiel considered this unexpected declaration. Finally, he turned to Leah. And this is what you want? To risk your secure future on this possibility? Leah looked from her father to Kit, something resolute settling in her expression. Yes, I want the chance to discover if what I feel is real, not what's most convenient or secure. Ezekiel closed his eyes briefly, his internal struggle evident. When he opened them, resignation mingled with concern. I cannot give my blessing to this. Not yet. He held up a hand when Leah began to protest. But neither will I stand in your way if this is truly what you want. He fixed Kit with a stern look. However, there will be conditions. Relief flooded through Kit. Name them. First, the engagement to Victor must be properly dissolved. I'll speak with him. Ezekiel's tone suggested this would not be a pleasant conversation. Second, you will find respectable employment in Silvercrest if you intend to court my daughter. No more disappearing for months with cattle drives. Agreed, Kit said without hesitation. Third, and most importantly, Ezekiel continued, you will court Leah properly, with all the respect and propriety her position in this community demands. No more private meetings without chaperones, no presumptions. Of course, Kit nodded. I wouldn't have it any other way. Ezekiel studied him for a long moment, then turned to his daughter. I hope you understand what you're doing, Leah, and I pray I won't live to regret this decision. Thank you, Father. Leah embraced him tightly. I know this isn't easy for you. As Ezekiel awkwardly returned his daughter's embrace, he looked over her shoulder at Kit. Mr. Valmont, I suggest you make yourself scarce while I speak with Mr. Harrington. Return tomorrow, and we'll discuss your employment prospects. Kit recognized the dismissal and nodded. Until tomorrow, then. Outside, as Kit walked toward the saloon where he'd left Thunder, he felt lighter than he had in years. Nothing was certain. Harrington might cause trouble, finding suitable work would be challenging, and Ezekiel's approval remained tentative at best. Yet for the first time since leaving Kentucky, he felt as though he was moving toward something rather than away. The confrontation with Harrington proved more volatile than anyone anticipated. Outraged by what he perceived as betrayal, the mine owner made veiled threats against both the Taylor's business and Kit personally. It took 3 days for tensions to subside, during which time Kit secured lodging above the livery stable and began searching for employment. Opportunity came from an unexpected quarter. Judge Preston, whose horse Kit had calmed during his first days in Silvercrest, owned substantial ranch land outside town. Learning of Kit's situation, he offered him a position managing the horse breeding operation, a role that utilized Kit's extensive knowledge of equine care, while keeping him close to Silvercrest. Over the following months, Kit proved his commitment through consistent work and respectful courtship. Sunday dinners with the Taylors became regular occurrences, though Ezekiel maintained a cautious distance. Margaret, however, welcomed Kit warmly, recognizing the positive change in her daughter's spirits. Kit and Leah's courtship unfolded under the watchful eyes of the community. They attended church socials together, walked along the creek on Sunday afternoons, always properly chaperoned by Daniel, and discovered in each other the connection that neither had expected to find. For Kit, each day brought new revelations, that putting down roots didn't mean surrendering freedom, but rather redefining it. That building something lasting could be as exhilarating as discovering new horizons. That love wasn't weakness, but strength of a different kind. 6 months after Kit chose to stay in Silvercrest, he approached Ezekiel with formal intent. The older man listened to his request with surprising equanimity. "You've proven more constant than I expected," Ezekiel admitted. "Judge Preston speaks highly of your work ethic, and I cannot deny my daughter's happiness. Does that mean I have your blessing?" Kit asked directly. Ezekiel considered him for a long moment. "It means I no longer object. The distinction may seem slight, but it's important to me." Kit nodded, understanding the concession for what it was, not enthusiastic approval, but acceptance. "I'll take care of her, Mr. Taylor. You have my word. See that you do." Ezekiel stood, extending his hand in a gesture that symbolized more than mere politeness. "My daughter believes you're worth fighting for. I hope she's right." The wedding took place the following spring, with wildflowers blanketing the hills around Silvercrest and promise hanging in the air like perfume. Judge Preston officiated, and Mason returned to stand as Kit's best man, bringing tales of their former outfit and good wishes from the men who'd witnessed the beginning of this unlikely romance. As Kit and Leah exchanged vows beneath an arch of mountain laurel, he marveled at the journey that had brought him here, from a man who believed love was a luxury cowboys couldn't afford to one who had discovered that the greatest freedom lay in choosing what to fight for. Later, at the celebration that followed, Kit found a moment alone with his bride as lanterns illuminated the town square and music filled the evening air. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, his arm around her waist. Leah looked up at him, her blue-green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Only that we wasted so much time believing we couldn't have this." "We have all the time in the world now," Kit assured her, thinking of the small house they'd built on Preston's land, of the life stretching before them. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The open trail, the freedom to go anywhere." Kit considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the stars on clear nights when the herd is settled. But then I remember I can see those same stars from our porch, with you beside me." He smiled. "Turns out freedom isn't about having no connections. It's about choosing the right ones." Across the square, Ezekiel watched them with complex emotions playing across his face. Margaret slipped her arm through his, following his gaze. "You were wrong about him," she said gently. "It happens to the best of us." Ezekiel harumphed, though without real irritation. "Perhaps. Time will tell. I think it already has." Margaret squeezed his arm affectionately. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. You taught her that, you know, with every story about building this town from nothing." A reluctant smile tugged at Ezekiel's mouth. "She could have chosen someone more practical." "She chose someone who looks at her the way you still look at me," Margaret countered. "That's practical enough for a lifetime." As twilight deepened into night, Kit led his bride in a dance beneath the stars that had once been his only constant companions. The path that had brought him here was neither straight nor predictable, but standing with Leah in his arms, surrounded by a community he now called home, Kit Valmont knew with absolute certainty that he'd found what he'd been searching for all along, not in the endless horizon, but in the courage to stop running. Some things, indeed, were worth fighting for.